The atmosphere inside the arena on Friday night was not electric. It was suffocating, a heavy blanket of humidity and anticipation that usually signals a storm rather than a sporting event. The main event had just concluded in a way that left the crowd restless, a disjointed finish that had the audience in the front row checking their watches rather than cheering. Michael Cole and the commentary team were filling dead air, their voices distinctively low as they tried to transition to a commercial break that never seemed to come. The production crew, usually a machine of perfect timing, seemed to falter as the lights in the rafters didn't dim, but flickered with an irregularity that felt less like a technical glitch and more like a warning. There was no music, there was no pyrotechnics cue, there was just a sudden, aggressive drop in audio levels that stripped the arena of its artificial noise, leaving only the confused murmurs of 18,000 people. It was the sound of uncertainty, a rare commodity in a scripted world where every second is usually accounted for. You could see the confusion ripple through the ringside area. Security guards shifted their weight, glancing toward the gorilla position for instructions that weren't coming. The silence stretched for 10 seconds, then 20, becoming physically uncomfortable. It wasn't the exciting silence of a surprise. It was the awkward silence of a mistake. The giant LED screens wrapping the arena went black, not with a flashy graphic, but with a total power kill. In that darkness, the air shifted. The casual fans assumed a power outage, but the diehards felt the change in pressure. It was the specific heavy dread of a presence that had been gone long enough to become a ghost, now suddenly forcing its way back into the living room without an invitation. When the first note finally hit, it wasn't the explosive, heroic anthem the world had memorized. It was a distorted, slowed-down industrial grind that barely resembled her old theme. Stripping away the pop-punk energy and leaving only a menacing rhythm, the Titantron remained completely black. There was no entrance video, no montage of championship victories, and no bright orange graphics. Out of the shadows of the entrance tunnel, Becky Lynch emerged, but the figure walking down the ramp bore little resemblance to the man the audience remembered. She wore no vibrant colors, no eccentric glasses, and carried no ego. Dressed in a muted dark trench coat with her hair matted down, she walked with a terrifying, deliberate slowness. She didn't look at the camera. She didn't look at the fans who were now standing in a mix of hushed shock and scattered, confused applause. This wasn't a return designed for a pop. It was an invasion. The commentary team, usually quick with a catchphrase or a history lesson, remained completely silent, letting the ambient noise of the confused crowd tell the story. As she slid under the bottom rope, the camera zoomed in, revealing eyes that looked tired, almost hollow, devoid of the spark that usually defines a babyface return. She stood in the center of the ring, not acknowledging the hard camera, simply staring at the turnbuckle with a clenched jaw. The crowd's reaction fractured. Pockets of Becky chants tried to start but died out quickly, suffocated by the tension radiating from the ring. She picked up a microphone, the feedback screeching through the speakers, and just held it. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a suppressed rage that felt too real for television. She looked like someone who hadn't come back to wrestle, but to settle a debt that no one else knew existed. The moment the broadcast faded to black, the curated reality of the show disintegrated into immediate, frantic backstage chaos. Usually, a return of this magnitude is a celebration, a moment where producers high-five and writers scramble to capitalize on the trending topic. This was different. As Becky walked through the curtain, the hallway cleared. The roster, usually gathered around monitors to watch the competition, stood with their arms crossed, their expressions ranging from defensive to genuinely unsettled. There were no warm embraces or welcome-back handshakes. The younger talent looked at her with intimidation, sensing a shift in the hierarchy that threatened their spots, while the veterans watched with a cynical wariness, recognizing the look of someone who had gone off script. The producers in the gorilla position were shouting into headsets, trying to figure out how much of the segment was planned and how much was a deviation, but the answers were non-existent. Becky walked past them all without a word, heading straight to a private dressing room that had been marked with only a piece of tape. The locker room morale, which had been stable for months, instantly fractured. You could feel the oxygen leave the women's division. It wasn't just that a top star was back. It was the energy she brought with her volatile mix of entitlement and desperation. The writers were already huddled in a corner, frantically rewriting the next month of television, realizing that their carefully laid plans for the championship picture had just been incinerated. The atmosphere backstage wasn't excitement, it was crisis management. The lines between character and person had been blurred so aggressively that everyone, from the referees to the catering staff, felt like they were walking on eggshells around a ticking time bomb. By the time the arena began to empty, the digital world was already spiraling into a frenzy, but the tone of the conversation was distinctively somber. Social media wasn't filled with the usual celebratory GIFs or fantasy booking scenarios. Instead, the timeline was dominated by blurry screenshots of her face, with users debating whether she looked unwell or if this was the greatest acting performance of her career. The headlines from sports outlets didn't read "Becky Lynch returns," they read "What was that?" The ambiguity of the segment created a vacuum that speculation rushed to fill. But the consequences went deeper than metrics and engagement. The narrative immediately shifted to the personal toll of the industry.
Ow.
Questions arose about the balance of family life and the addiction to the spotlight. Seth Rollins, cornered by paparazzi leaving the arena, refused to comment, his usual charismatic deflection replaced by a stoic, protective silence that only fueled the rumors. The return forced an uncomfortable conversation about legacy, about the inability of the greats to stay away, even when they have nothing left to prove. It cast a shadow over the current champion, whose reign was suddenly rendered secondary not by a match, but by a mood. The media appearances scheduled for other superstars were canceled or hijacked by questions about Becky, breeding resentment that would inevitably bleed onto the screen. This wasn't just a plot twist, it was a disruption of the entire ecosystem. The pressure on her was now immense, not just to perform, but to justify the darkness she had brought with her. She had returned not as a savior, but as a storm, and the wreckage was already piling up before the first bell had even rung. In the quiet hours of the morning, long after the production trucks had been packed and the arena lights turned off, the true weight of the night began to settle.
8.
The most haunting aspect of the return wasn't the silence of the crowd or the confusion of the commentary team.
8.
It was the realization that the character of the man was dead, replaced by the reality of the woman who played her. The script had been flipped in a way that exposed the machinery of the business. We, the audience, realized we were not witnessing a triumphant comeback story, but a tragedy in motion. We had cheered for her to come back, demanding her presence, unaware that our demand was the very thing trapping her in this cycle. The twist wasn't a heel turn or a new faction. The twist was the mirror held up to the viewer. We saw a figure who had conquered everything yet found no peace in the quiet of retirement. Compelled to return to the violence because the silence of normal life was too loud to bear. The episode ended not with a cliffhanger, but with a feeling of complicity. As the screen faded, the lingering question wasn't who will she fight next, but rather why did we let her come back? It left the viewer with a profound sense of melancholy, realizing that in the theater of professional wrestling, the most shocking moments aren't the ones that make you scream, but the ones that make you worry. She was back, and for the first time in history it felt like a loss.